Her scream echoed down the street, but no one moved. Everyone stood frozen. Their eyes locked on the woman who had just dared to block an ambulance. No one said it out loud. But they were all thinking the same thing. What kind of person does that? Karen didn't hear their silence. She only heard her own indignation. A roaring drumbeat that drowned out sirens, neighbors, and even common sense. Her rope still half tied from rushing outside, she stomped forward, heels striking the pavement with the self-importance of someone who'd never been told no. This was her spot. The ambulance had pulled into the space in front of her house, a piece of curb she had long declared her own, despite there being no legal signage to support it. Her luxury sedan usually sat there, gleaming like a trophy. Today, it was a vehicle covered in flashing lights, and to Karen, that felt like trespass. Inside the ambulance, the paramedics barely glanced at her. Their eyes were locked on the house next door, where a man in his 70s had collapsed in the hallway, gasping for air. They'd already lost 30 precious seconds to Karen shouting, "You need to move now," she barked. The paramedic, mid-stride, didn't even slow. "Ma'am, we're responding to a life-threatening emergency," Karen scoffed. "That doesn't give you the right to park wherever you want." She planted herself in front of the ambulance like a gatekeeper of morality, arms folded tightly across her chest. "You're blocking my driveway. You're ruining the harmony of this community." Behind curtains and from doorways, neighbors watched with held breath, some already raising their phones. The absurdity of it all was hard to believe unless you saw it for yourself. A woman obstructing emergency care over a parking space. The second paramedic tried to reason with her. "We'll be gone as soon as we stabilize the patient. Please step aside." Karen shook her head so hard her sunglasses nearly flew off. "Not until you move that thing. You people think you can just do whatever you want. Not here." A second later, she pulled out her phone. 911, "What's your emergency?" Came the calm voice on the line. "Yes, I need the police. There's an ambulance blocking my driveway. It's unauthorized and disturbing the peace." There was a pause, then, cautiously, "Ma'am, did you say an ambulance?" Karen's voice sharpened. "Yes, they're parked in my reserved spot and disrupting our community. I demand it be towed, by now." The paramedics had made it to the patient inside, but the return path to the ambulance was still blocked by Karen. She stood unmoving like a sentry at a gate she believed she owned. Her neighbors whispered, horrified. Some took photos, others took videos. All of them were thinking the same thing. Someone was going to die if she didn't move. That's when the siren came, a new one, a different tone. A police cruiser slowed to a stop behind the ambulance, lights spinning, engine purring with quiet authority. Officer Davis stepped out, sunglasses catching the glare of the afternoon sun. His expression didn't shift as he scanned the scene, paramedics sweating under pressure. A small crowd of residents and a woman clearly the center of the storm standing like a monument to misplaced pride. "What's going on here?" he asked. The lead paramedic turned toward him. "We've got a patient inside in critical condition. This woman is physically blocking our access to the ambulance." Karen turned, arms flaring. "They parked in my space. This is private property. I called you to have them removed." For a long moment, Officer Davis said nothing, then calmly, "Ma'am, you called 911. To have paramedics removed from a medical emergency?" Karen's chin lifted. "They're disturbing the peace and trespassing. I pay dues to live in a respectable neighborhood. That includes designated parking." Officer Davis looked past her to the house next door, through the front window. He could just make out the silhouette of someone receiving CPR. He looked back at Karen. "You need to move, now." "I'm not going anywhere until they're towed," she snapped. "Ma'am." His voice changed, still calm, but with steel beneath it. "Obstructing emergency services is a criminal offense. You could be arrested. I know my rights," she yelled. Officer Davis didn't blink. He raised his radio to his mouth. "Dispatch, I need backup. Possible obstruction of EMS in progress." The murmurs in the crowd rose, whispers turned to gasps, more phones went up. Karen paled slightly, but doubled down. "This is harassment. I'm not moving. You people think you can just walk all over me. I've lived here 15 years. That spot is mine." Davis stepped closer. "That spot isn't worth someone's life." Her voice faltered for the first time. I didn't say they should die. You blocked a path to a medical transport. If the patient inside doesn't make it." He let the words hang there. The weight of them settled heavily on the pavement between them. Karen blinked. Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came. Then, slowly, Davis reached for his cuffs. "You are under arrest for obstruction of emergency medical personnel." She stepped back. "Wait, what?" "You can't," but it was too late. The click of the cuff seemed louder than the sirens had been, louder than her voice, louder than anything. As Officer Davis guided her toward the cruiser, a hush fell over the neighborhood. In that silence, the paramedics loaded the patient into the ambulance and drove away. And in the space Karen once guarded so fiercely, only Tire tracks remained. But what she didn't realize yet, what no one fully grasped, was that this moment wasn't the end. The cuffs clinked again as they closed around her wrists. Karen stumbled slightly. Not from resistance, but from disbelief. Her voice, once sharp and commanding, was now cracked and shaking. "You can't do this to me," she said, half to herself, half to Officer Davis. "I'm not the criminal here," but he didn't answer. The murmuring crowd said more than enough. Behind every lowered whisper was judgment, disbelief, a kind of stunned silence that clung to the air like fog. And Karen, for the first time in a long while, had nothing left to say. As she was led to the back of the cruiser, a man stepped onto the sidewalk across the street. His shirt was wrinkled, his face lined with exhaustion and fear. His name was Mark Thompson. And inside his house, his father had just been stabilized after suffering a near-fatal cardiac arrest. The paramedics had done their job, barely. But they'd lost time they never should have lost. Mark's eyes locked on Karen. Just as Officer Davis opened the cruiser door, he didn't speak, he didn't shout, he just stared. And somehow, that silence cut deeper than anything else. Karen looked away, but Mark, he wasn't done, not yet, because the moment his father was wheeled away, and the sirens faded into the distance, the weight of what had just happened came crashing down. He could still hear the gasps. Still see the look on the paramedic's face when they said, "We lost precious minutes," still feel the helplessness. Watching the woman across the street argue about parking, while his father turned blue in the hallway. Mark turned to Officer Davis. "I want to press charges," he said, voice low but steady. "She interfered with life-saving care." Davis nodded once. "You'll have your chance." Inside the cruiser, Karen's breathing picked up. No one had ever filed a charge against her. Neighbors might have complained behind her back, but she was used to being untouchable, the self-appointed watchdog of her pristine HOA community. But something was shifting rapidly. As the cruiser pulled away, one of the neighbors, Mrs. Alvarez, finally spoke aloud what everyone was thinking. She blocked an ambulance, she whispered, over a parking spot. Her words weren't loud, but they spread like fire. By that night, the footage had already reached the local Facebook groups. Within hours, it had been copied to Nextdoor, Reddit, and half a dozen local Twitter feeds. Karen's face, red with rage, sunglasses askew, was now plastered across the screen with captions like, "Karen blocks paramedics trying to save a man's life, 911 call from hell. Woman calls cops on an ambulance in her spot. HOA gone mad. You won't believe what she did." By morning, it had hit the local news. Mark Thompson didn't want attention, he didn't want a story. But he did want accountability. When the reporter came to his door, camera crew in tow, he nearly turned them away, but then he remembered those gasping breaths, the shaking hands, the sound of his mother crying on the phone. So he stood tall and told the truth. "My dad could have died." She wasn't confused, she wasn't scared, she was angry. She wanted control, and that almost cost a man his life. He paused, eyes narrowing. "I'm pressing charges, not because I want revenge, but because someone has to stand up and say this is not okay. That a parking space is not worth a human life." That clip alone was shared over 500,000 times in 3 days, and the more people saw it, the more Karen's image unraveled. Her name became a punchline, a hashtag, a warning. But behind the public fallout was something even more serious brewing: the HOA. For years, Karen had walked into board meetings like she was the HOA. She'd bullied neighbors into trimming hedges, reported minor infractions with gleeful precision, and once even tried to ban kids from drawing chalk art on the sidewalk. But now, the same board she had once controlled was gathering without her, and for the first time, her name was at the top of the agenda. Not as an enforcer, but as a liability. She made national news, the HOA president said, rubbing his temples as the emergency meeting came to order, for blocking emergency services. "We have to respond." The room was unusually quiet. No one was laughing. No one was defending her. One board member raised a hand. "I suggest we install emergency vehicle priority signs throughout the neighborhood. Make it policy, no parked vehicles during active emergencies, period." Another member chimed in. "And I think the first sign should go up right in front of Karen's house." There were nods. A few chuckles, but they weren't mocking. They were tired. Tired of fear, tired of silence. Tired of pretending that her behavior was just strong opinions or passion. This wasn't about property anymore. This was about principle. By the end of the meeting, the board had voted unanimously to enact the signage ordinance and issue a formal statement denouncing Karen's actions. A neighbor named David said it best: "If she'd just stepped aside, we wouldn't be here." But she planted her feet, and now everyone sees who she really is. And perhaps most painfully of all, Karen saw it too, sitting alone in her home, her phone buzzing with messages. None supportive. She stared at the television in disbelief. Footage of her rest. Clips of Mark speaking outside his home, a blurry video of her screaming, "You're ruining my community." Was this really her? Was that her voice? She closed her eyes, but the voices didn't go away. And outside, work crews were already drilling the new emergency priority sign into the grass beside her. Driveway. Bright yellow. Bold letters, a symbol she couldn't ignore. She yanked the blinds shut, but it was too late. This wasn't just about public humiliation anymore. This was about consequence. About a woman who had spent years enforcing rules, and who now found herself on the other side of the line. But Karen still didn't understand the depth of it. Not yet. Not until the doorbell rang the following morning, and a uniformed officer handed her a manila envelope, a lawsuit filed by Mark Thompson for obstruction of emergency services, emotional distress, and endangerment. Karen's hands trembled, the room around her swam. She sat down, the envelope still unopened in her lap. A long silence followed. For the first time in a very long time, Karen was speechless, but the world around her was not. Her neighbors, they were organizing a town hall. The HOA? They were issuing new emergency protocols. Mark, he was being invited to speak publicly. Not about anger, but about community. And Karen, she was still trying to figure out what went wrong. But that's the thing about entitlement. You don't see the fall until you've already hit the ground. And for Karen, the ground was getting closer with every knock on the door, every headline, every yellow sign outside her window. She had tried to protect a parking spot, and in doing so, she lost the only thing that ever really gave her power, her place in the community. But the story wasn't over, because one question still lingered, heavy in the air. Could she ever undo the damage she had caused? Or was this the moment she would finally have to face something even harder than public shame? The letter sat untouched on her kitchen counter. She couldn't bring herself to open it. Karen stared out the window instead, watching the wind toss leaves across her perfectly manicured lawn. Everything looked the same. The roses still bloomed. The curb was still painted just right. Her luxury sedan sat in the driveway, gleaming. And yet nothing felt the same. Because just a few feet away, hammered deep into the ground like an accusation, was the new emergency vehicle priority sign. Its yellow face screamed, "You are not above this anymore." Neighbors passed by, walking their dogs or jogging, some offering her cold nods, others pretending not to see her at all. The silence spoke louder than their words ever could. They used to fear her. Now they pitied her, or worse, laughed. She thought about calling the HOA, threatening legal action, demanding they remove the sign. But deep down, she already knew it wouldn't work. The power she once held, the ability to bend people, rules, and outcomes to her will, had vanished the moment the handcuffs clicked. So she did nothing, until another knock at the door snapped her out of the haze. This time, it wasn't an officer or a news crew. It was her next-door neighbor, Evelyn. The same woman who had stood silently on her porch the day of the incident. The same woman who had once baked her Christmas cookies, back before things turned icy between them over a dispute about tree branches. Now she stood in Karen's doorway, holding something unexpected, a casserole dish. Karen blinked. I wasn't expecting visitors," she muttered. Evelyn didn't smile. "I'm not here to chat." Karen stepped aside, unsure if she was being comforted or confronted. Evelyn placed the dish on the counter, then turned to face her. "I brought this from Mark's family. His father's still in the hospital. I thought you might want to come with me when I drop it off." Karen's face froze. "Why would I?" "You don't have to," Evelyn said. "But if you've got even an ounce of decency left in you, you'll walk with me." "Not for you, for them." The words hit like stones. Karen didn't answer. She just stood there, staring at her reflection in the microwave door, wondering when exactly her image had become so hollow. Evelyn didn't wait for a reply. She picked up the casserole and walked out the door alone. That night, Karen finally opened the envelope. The lawsuit was more detailed than she expected. The words gross negligence jumped out at her, obstruction of critical care, emotional distress, civil interference. The list went on, but it wasn't the legal jargon that cut deepest. It was the statement attached from Mark's wife. "I was holding my father-in-law's hand when he stopped breathing." The paramedics were 15 seconds away, but they had to go around her. They lost time because of her, time we didn't have to lose. Karen put the pages down. For the first time in years, she felt something strange. It wasn't anger or control or entitlement. It was shame, a tightness in her throat, a burning in her eyes. She wiped her face and told herself it was just stress, not guilt, but deep down, she knew. The next morning, she avoided going outside. She waited until dusk, when the sun had dipped low and the sidewalks were empty. Then, with slow steps, she walked past her driveway and crossed the street. Mark's house stood dark and quiet. No laughter, no music, just a porch light casting long shadows on the pavement. She stood at the edge of the lawn for a long time, then turned around and went home. She never rang the bell, but the next day someone rang hers. It was a teenage girl, maybe 16, Karen. Didn't recognize her? "You're Mrs. Karen, right?" she asked. Karen hesitated. "Yes," the girl extended a phone. "I'm in journalism class. I'm doing a video on the incident. The ambulance thing. My teacher says we have to interview people from both sides." Karen blinked. "Excuse me? You don't have to talk. I just thought, it's your side of the story too." Karen's heart pounded. She should have slammed the door. She should have told her to leave. Instead, she stepped outside. "I don't have a side," she said quietly. The girl frowned. "You mean, you admit it was wrong?" Karen looked past her. Past the street, past the sign, past the fading headlines and whispers. "I mean, there shouldn't be sides when someone's life is on the line." The girl paused, then hit the stop recording button on her phone. "Thanks," she said. That actually helped, and she left. Karen stood alone again, unsure of what had just happened. But for once, she didn't feel like slamming the door behind her. Later that week, something else arrived, a flyer. HOA Town Hall Meeting, Open Forum, Emergency Protocols and Community Responsibility. Karen nearly threw it in the trash, but something made her pause. Beneath the title was a note, "Residents are encouraged to speak." She stared at those words. Her old self would have seen it as an invitation to dominate, to preach, to demand. Now, she wasn't sure she had the right to speak at all. But the night of the meeting, she showed up. She sat near the back, alone, quiet. As Mark stood at the front of the room and addressed the crowd, Karen felt every gaze that drifted her way, but no one booed. No one shouted. Instead, they listened. Mark spoke with grace, with pain, with clarity. He didn't name her, didn't shame her. He talked about timing, about community, about what it means to trust your neighbors, not just to keep their lawns tidy, but to care when it counts. And when the floor opened for comments, Karen stood. Not proudly, not defiantly, just honestly. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she said softly. Murmurs rippled through the room. "I saw a vehicle in front of my house, and I got angry. I didn't ask questions. I didn't look. I just reacted." She swallowed hard. "And by the time I realized what was happening, it was too late." No one spoke. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Not just to the Thompsons, but to all of you, for what I became." She turned and sat down again, and, for a long time, silence. But it wasn't the silence of judgment. It was the silence of something beginning. Because for all her flaws, she'd finally said the one thing no one expected her to say: "I was wrong." She wasn't forgiven that night, not entirely, not publicly, but she wasn't cast out either. And sometimes in communities like this one, that's the first sign that healing has started. Out on the street, the emergency vehicle sign still stood. It hadn't vanished, but now it meant something different. Not just shame, but change. No applause followed her words, no heads nodded, no one rushed to embrace her. But when Karen walked out of the town hall that night, something had shifted. She could feel it. Not in grand gestures or dramatic forgiveness, but in the way the crowd had let her speak. In the fact that no one interrupted her, in the way even Evelyn, seated to rows ahead, glanced back and didn't immediately look away. It wasn't acceptance, but it wasn't exile either. And for the first time in her life, Karen realized that the road back didn't begin with being right, it began with being real. She stepped into the quiet evening air, the echo of her own confession still ringing in her chest. Under the soft glow of the street lamps, her shadow stretched long against the sidewalk, not looming, not powerful, just present. Across the street, she spotted Mark. He stood near his car, speaking with someone, maybe a reporter, maybe another neighbor, she couldn't tell. But the moment he noticed her, their eyes met. Karen froze. This was it. The moment she feared most, the one she'd rehearsed 1,000 times in the mirror, but never found the courage to face. She turned to walk away, but then she heard his voice. "Karen." She stopped slowly. She turned back. Mark stepped toward her, not fast, not aggressive, just steady. He stood a few feet away, arms at his sides, expression unreadable. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then he said something she wasn't prepared for. "My dad's going to make it." Karen's breath caught. "I thought you should know," he added. She opened her mouth to respond, to say thank you, or "I'm glad," or anything human, but nothing came out. Mark looked at her, not with fury, not with bitterness, but with something else entirely. Clarity. "I didn't press charges to destroy you," he said. Karen nodded slowly. "I just wanted to make sure no one else ever had to go through what we did." A lump formed in her throat. "I understand," she whispered. He gave her a quiet nod, not warm, not cold, just final. Then he turned and walked away. That night, Karen sat in her living room, lights off, television muted, watching the shadows shift across her hardwood floor. She thought about her past. About every time she had scolded a neighbor for leaving a trash bin out too long. About every notice she'd filed, every confrontation over grass height, every moment. She'd equated control with contribution. She thought she was protecting the community. But all she'd done was alienate it, and now she saw what real protection looked like. It was a father calling 911 while holding his own father's hand. It was a community that stopped what it was doing and paid attention when life was at stake. It was paramedics who raced past angry words and shouting neighbors just to save someone they'd never met. That was community. And Karen? Karen had forgotten that somewhere along the way, days passed, the online buzz began to fade, replaced by newer scandals, newer Karens, newer hashtags, but the real change wasn't online. It was right outside her window where the sign still stood, not as punishment, but as promise. And slowly, life returned to the neighborhood. Children played again on sidewalks. Evelyn resumed her morning walks. People stopped whispering when Karen passed by, not because they liked her, but because their anger had shifted into something more stable. Resolve. And Karen, she didn't hide anymore. She didn't retreat. She stayed. And then she tried something unexpected. She showed up at the next HOA meeting, not to control it, not to lecture, just to listen. She sat near the back again, taking notes quietly as the board discussed new community outreach programs, first aid workshops, neighborhood emergency response teams, and a neighborhood app to better connect residents. At one point, the president asked for volunteers to distribute emergency preparedness flyers door to door. Karen raised her hand. A beat of awkward silence followed, but then the president nodded. Double quotes, "Thank you," he said. "We could use the help." It wasn't fanfare. It wasn't forgiveness. It was opportunity. And Karen took it. She delivered the flyers house to house. Not quickly, not confidently, but carefully. Some neighbors opened their doors and gave her sharp looks. Others took the flyer without a word. A few smiled faintly, but no one slammed the door in her face, and that, for Karen, was a start. The true turning point came a week later. It was evening. She was returning home from a grocery run when she saw a woman on the sidewalk, bent over, clutching her ankle. A dog leash trailed from her hand. Karen stopped her. Years ago, she might have called HOA enforcement to report a dog off leash. Now, she ran to help. The woman had twisted her ankle on a crack in the sidewalk. Karen helped her sit, found her phone, and stayed with her until help arrived. When the paramedics pulled up, different ones this time, Karen stood out of the way. Silent, respectful. They didn't recognize her, but she remembered them, and when they were done, one of them turned to her and said, "Thanks for staying with her." Karen nodded once. "It's the least I could do." That moment wasn't caught on video. There were no hashtags, no headlines, just a woman learning to be part of something again. Bit by bit, one quiet act at a time. A few weeks later, she was walking to her mailbox when Evelyn called out from her garden, "I heard what you did." Karen hesitated. Evelyn gave a small nod. "She's a friend of mine. The woman you helped." Karen looked down. I couldn't walk away again." Evelyn didn't say anything for a moment. Then she smiled, just barely. "You shouldn't have to." Another pause. Then, "Would you like to come by for coffee sometime?" Karen's eyes lifted. "Yeah," she said. "Yeah, I'd like that." There was no grand reconciliation. No dramatic embrace. Just a nod between two neighbors who had spent years avoiding each other and who, in one small moment, decided not to anymore. Karen didn't undo what she'd done. She never could, but she chose to do better. And sometimes, in the quiet corners of a quiet neighborhood, that's the most powerful choice there is. Because redemption doesn't come all at once. It doesn't come in viral moments or courtroom scenes. It comes in the everyday. In the flyers on doorsteps. In the chairs at the back of the room. In the hand you reach for when no one's watching. And in the mirror, when you finally look at the person staring back and choose to stop defending her and start changing her. Some neighbors started saying it out loud. Not in compliments, not exactly, but in a softer way. Like a burden was being slowly lifted off their community. "She's different now," one of them said quietly during a backyard barbecue. "I think she actually meant it," another replied, spooning potato salad onto a plate while glancing across the street. Karen wasn't there, of course. She hadn't started attending social events yet. Not with the stain of her name still drawing in local gossip, but she had done something else. She had started showing up for the things no one wanted to deal with. Clearing broken glass after a thunderstorm shattered someone's car window, watering an elderly neighbor's garden while they were away, fixing the neighborhood bulletin board no one had touched in years. Small things, mundane things. But this time, she did them without complaint, without ceremony, without needing to be seen. And that's what made people notice. Because the old Karen, the Karen who once measured her value by enforcement and intimidation, would have made sure every good deed was posted, praised, and politically weaponized. This new version, she just did it and went home. But not everyone was ready to let her forget. It started with a letter. folded neatly in her mailbox, no name, no return address. Just 5 handwritten words, "You don't deserve forgiveness." Karen read it 3 times, her fingers trembled. Not because it surprised her, but because, deep down, she feared it might be true. That no matter how many things she fixed, no matter how many apologies she spoke, there would always be someone who couldn't, or wouldn't, see her as anything but the woman who blocked an ambulance. That night, she didn't sleep. She sat on the couch with the letter in her lap, replaying every detail of that day, the shouts, the flashing lights, the voice of the dispatcher trying to stay calm as she made her ridiculous complaint. It was still in her, that version of herself, the one who believed the rules only applied when they suited her. And that voice, it hadn't gone completely silent. It whispered now and then, "You had a point, they disrespected your space. It wasn't that serious." But every time it spoke, another memory slammed back against it, Mark's face, his father's struggling breath, the sickening realization that time, precious, irreplaceable time, had been stolen because of her. Karen folded the note in half, then again, until it was no bigger than a coin. And she set it on fire, not to destroy the guilt, but to accept that it would never fully leave her. The next morning, she walked to Mark's house. Not with a letter, not with a gift, just with a broom, a trash bag, and a clipboard. She knocked. His wife answered. Karen offered a gentle smile. "I'm organizing a community preparedness cleanup," she said. "Tree limbs, cracked sidewalks, old signage, anything that might get in the way during an emergency." She paused. "I was wondering if your family would like to be part of it." There was a silence. Then the door opened just a little wider. "We'd be willing to talk about it," his wife said cautiously. Karen didn't expect a yes. The maybe was more than enough. Word of the cleanup spread quickly. It wasn't labeled a redemption project, but everyone knew what it was, and that was okay. Because they also knew it wasn't about her anymore. It was about fixing something broken. Not just a reputation, but a trust. Dozens of neighbors showed up. Mark came to, quiet, focused. He didn't talk much, but he worked hard. At one point, as Karen and Mark clipped overgrown brush near the cul-de-sac, she handed him a water bottle. He took it, nodded, said nothing, but he didn't walk away. And in that silence, that shared labor, that mutual presence, something more honest than words passed between them. Karen never asked for a clean slate. She knew better. But what she could ask for was a future that wasn't defined by a single day, and every weed she pulled, every piece of broken fence she helped mend, was a step toward that. After the cleanup, the HOA president approached her. "I've got a proposal," he said, holding up a sheet of paper. "Emergency training session, first aid, CPR, disaster prep. I want someone to help run it." Karen braced herself. Then he added, "And I think it should be you." Her eyebrows lifted. "Me?" "You've lived both sides of it," he said simply. "You've made mistakes, and you've owned them. That's more than most people ever do." She didn't answer right away because part of her was still afraid she'd be heckled, judged, recorded again, and mocked online. But another part of her, the part that had been slowly rebuilding from the inside out, whispered something stronger. "You can face this. You've faced worse." She nodded. "I'll do it." The community center filled slowly that Saturday. Some came out of curiosity, some out of caution, some because they genuinely wanted to learn. Karen stood at the front, nervous but prepared. She didn't start with a lecture. She didn't start with a checklist. She started with a story. "I'm not a first responder," she said, "but I've stood in the way of one." A ripple of discomfort passed through the room. She let it settle. "I thought I was right. I thought I was protecting something important. But I wasn't." She paused. "I was protecting my ego, my illusion of control, and because of that, someone almost died." No one spoke. She let the weight of it sit in the room like fog. "But I've spent every day since trying to be someone who wouldn't make that mistake again." Her voice softened. "Not just for me, but for you." She glanced around the room at Evelyn, at Mark, at teenagers who hadn't been born when Karen bought her home. "Because if I could go back, I wouldn't just get out of the way, I'd helped." Her eyes glistened. "And I hope now, I finally am." What followed was one of the most attended and positively reviewed sessions the HOA had ever hosted. Karen didn't lead every part, but she showed up. She passed out handbooks. She stayed late to clean up. And as people filed out at the end of the day, more than one stopped to shake her hand. Not because they'd forgotten, but because they'd seen her, truly seen her. Trying. And trying in a world full of pride and posturing still mattered. Especially when it came from someone who used to think she was untouchable. That night, Karen stood on her front porch. The street was quiet. The sign across her driveway still stood, still yellow, still bold, but now, she didn't shrink from it. She walked to it, ran her fingers along the lettering, and whispered softly, "Thank you," because without it, she might never have learned how to be part of something, How to serve. How to let go. And how to stand up, not above her neighbors, but beside them. The training session changed more than just perceptions, it started conversations. At driveways, across fences. In front of mailboxes. Neighbors who once only exchanged silent glances were now asking real questions. Do you know how to use an EpiPen? What's the number for local animal control? Would you check on my grandma if something ever happened? It wasn't just awareness. It was connection. The kind Karen used to think she had, through authority, through rules, but never truly did now. She was building it for the first time, one interaction at a time. It was subtle. No one gave her a standing ovation. No one said we forgive you out loud, but you could feel it in how they responded. In the way someone lingered just a second longer to chat after a neighborhood cleanup. And how people no longer crossed the street when they saw her coming. In the small basket of lemon muffins left anonymously at her doorstep with a note that simply said, "Thanks for showing up. But change never comes without pushback, especially when the past still has teeth." 2 weeks after the training session, Karen received another letter. This one wasn't anonymous. It was from the county. An official notification, the civil lawsuit from Mark's family was moving forward, despite all the progress. Despite the town halls and flyers and CPR sign-ups, the legal process didn't forget, and neither, it seemed, had Mark. Karen sat at her kitchen table, rereading the court date over and over. A part of her had secretly hoped it would quietly disappear, that maybe Mark had seen the effort and decided to let it go. But justice doesn't bend for convenience, and remorse doesn't erase consequences. She didn't cry. She didn't panic. She just sat there in the soft morning light, letting the reality of it settle. This wasn't over. The next few days passed in a haze. Her mailbox filled with notices, her email pinged with alerts from a lawyer she could barely afford, and the HOA president offered quiet support, but reminded her that legal matters were outside their scope. Karen didn't blame him, but the pressure tightened around her like a vice. Every progress she had made felt suddenly paper-thin, like a gust of wind could blow it all away. Until she saw him again. Mark. He was walking his dog along the sidewalk, his expression unreadable as always. Karen hesitated, then she crossed the street. "Mark," she said quietly. He stopped, waited. She didn't speak right away, she just stood there, breath shaking. "I got the notice," she finally said. Mark nodded. "I understand why," she added. "I'm not asking you to withdraw it." He looked at her, surprised. "I just wanted you to know something. Every morning since that day, I've thought about what I did. Every time I walk past that sign, every time I see an ambulance pass our street." She looked down. "I know the damage is already done, but I'm going to keep doing the work anyway, whether anyone's watching or not." A long silence followed. Then Mark gave a slow nod. "That's all I needed to hear," he said. Karen's eyes lifted. "I'm not withdrawing the suit," he continued gently, "but I'll ask the judge to consider restorative options, community service, public education, real accountability." Karen felt her throat tighten. "That's more than fair," she whispered. He nodded again, and this time, he offered something she didn't expect, a hand, not of friendship, but of understanding. She took it. The trial came 3 weeks later. It wasn't dramatic. No cameras, no crowds, just a quiet courtroom with cold fluorescent lights and a judge who had already read the case in full. Karen stood and took full responsibility. No excuses. No deflections. "I put my own pride before someone's life," she said, "and it's something I'll regret for the rest of mine." The judge listened. And when she ruled, her decision echoed everything Karen had already started doing: community service, public speaking at civic centers, workshops on emergency response awareness. Karen accepted all of it, not as punishment, but as purpose. She walked out of that courthouse not ashamed, but resolved, and the community responded. News spread again, but this time not with scorn. Headlines read, "Former HOA enforcer now teaches emergency etiquette after viral incident." From infamy to impact, local woman turns mistaken to message people still remembered. But now, they remembered the after, too. The middle schooler, who used to ride her bike on the far side of the street, now waved when passing Karen's driveway. An older veteran who had once cursed her out during a fence dispute sent a note thanking her for her CPR demonstration at the senior center. Evelyn, who'd once considered moving away, knocked on her door one Sunday morning. "I'm starting a neighborhood garden," she said, holding a clipboard. "I could use someone good at organizing." Karen smiled. "I'm better with dirt these days than paperwork," she said. Evelyn grinned. "That's exactly what we need." So Karen picked up a trowel and got to work, on soil. On trust. On herself. She still had hard days. Days when someone would give her a sideways glance at the grocery store. Days when the memory of flashing red lights still echoed in her mind, but every time that happened, She'd do something small. Help someone with groceries, hold a door open. Say hello first. Not to erase her past, but to write a better present. The emergency sign never came down. And it never would, but Karen stopped seeing it as her shame. Now, it was her reminder that doing good isn't about who you used to be. It's about who you decide to become, even when no one thinks you can. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the community started believing in her again. The smoke came before anyone could hear the scream. It curled up from the corner house like a bad secret, thin gray tendrils slipping under eaves and into the wind. What started as a flicker from an overloaded outlet in the downstairs den turned into a roar in 30 seconds. The smell hit the street, sharp and metallic, fear made visible. No one expected it, no one planned for it. But the neighborhood had, quietly and imperfectly, been preparing for months. Karen was the first to see it. She was walking back from the community garden, dirt under her nails, a small notebook tucked into the pocket of her vest. Her routine had become a network of check-ins, a wave to the elderly widow to houses down, a quick inventory of fire extinguishers in the shared hallways of the HOA complex, and a mental tally of any cracks in sidewalks that could become hazards. She saw the smoke because she no longer expected perfection to hide disaster. She saw it because she'd trained to look. She didn't hesitate. Fire, she shouted, voice cutting through the faint hum of summer cicadas. Call 911. House on Cedar, downstairs, neighbors came pouring out. Some grabbed garden hoses. Others were already moving toward the back, checking windows, trying doors. In the middle of the chaos, a teenager from the training session, one of the kids who had been too shy to ask questions months ago, grabbed the megaphone they'd used for the emergency protocols drill and started directing people. Evacuate the upstairs, don't go back inside. Karen, get the hose on the side. She moved like someone who had always done this. The old instinct to control the narrative was replaced with crisp, efficient action. She didn't bark orders from a distance. She stepped in shoulder to shoulder with the people she'd once tried to regulate. She knelt beside a trembling elderly man who was yelling for his cat, putting a steadying hand on his elbow. It's okay, she said, not with authority, but with empathy. We'll get you out. The fire trucks arrived, sirens cutting through the humming tension of the street. The same crew that had once arrived to a different kind of chaos when she'd created pulled up, hoses unfurling like lifelines. The lead paramedic, the one who had previously exchanged worried looks with his team while Karen had ranted, caught her eye. He didn't look surprised. He gave a curt nod, a silent acknowledgement of what he saw. Someone who had been in the wrong place at the wrong time once, now in the right place at the most critical one. Inside, the smoke was thick, far worse than anyone had initially thought. The fire had traveled from the outlet through the paneling and into the insulation. Flames licked upward, hungry. The homeowner, a single mother with 2 small kids, stood across the street, her hands over her mouth, eyes wide as if she had misplaced her heart. Her son clutched his little sister, and they stared at their house like it was a movie scene, and not real life. Mark came running, his face pale, his dog dragging behind him. His first instinct was to go toward the smoke, but the teenager with the megaphone stopped him gently. Stay back, she said. They've got it, he's on. The neighbor watch team. She was referring to Karen. Mark's jaw tightened as he watched Karen move, not with the brittle, defensive stance from before, but with the calm authority of someone whose mistakes had taught her how not to be the problem anymore. There was still weight in his eyes, remnants of the lawsuit, of the arrest, of the nights of tension. But underneath it, something like relief. The woman who once had been the source of their fracture was now the one pulling people together. The fire was contained, no lives were lost. The kids were safe, wrapped in blankets, eyes dazed but breathing. The mother clung to them, fingers trembling, whispers of gratitude spilling between tears. The firefighters, sweating through their gear, began assessing damage and putting out hotspots. The damage would be significant, but the worst loss of life had been prevented. Later, when the adrenaline had faded and the neighborhood was quieting into that awkward post-crisis hush, people gathered on the sidewalk. Someone produced bottled water, someone else brought cold towels. The homeowner kept looking at Karen, the woman who had been the first to shout the alarm, and the one who had physically helped her son down the stairs. You did that, the woman said, voice cracked. You saved my kids. Karen's face was lined, her throat worked. We all did, she replied. You kept them close, that's what matters. Mark stood a little apart. His father recovered enough now to be out of the hospital regularly. Still shaky but laughing again had arrived. He'd insisted on coming, cane and all, because the family that had once been the center of the original incident had become, for him, a symbol of what a neighborhood could become if the broken pieces didn't just stay broken. He saw Karen up close then, not on a televised segment, not from the other side of a courtroom. There was soot on her cheek from the smoke drifting from the fire, a smudge of ash in her hair, and a small tear tracking down her face, and beneath all of it something resolute, present, later. In the quiet of the street as people began to drift home, the Homeowners Association president approached her. "You've earned something," he said. Voice low, "Not a medal, not a headline. But you've earned their trust. That's rarer than most of the things we post rules about." She nodded, too breathless to answer. Her hands still smelled faintly like smoke and the sharp citrus of emergency wipes. She didn't feel like she deserved anything. But she had stopped waiting to be told what she could take. She took, instead, a breath. She let the gratitude settle, not as absolution but as fuel. The fire became the first true public test of the new social contract the neighborhood had been trying to write together. It could have cracked open old wounds. It could have become fodder for the whispers that had once said, "She'll never change." Instead, it became proof. Proof that the woman who once built walls was now helping people climb over them when they fell into danger. But beneath the surface of that quiet evening, tension still seeped like underground water. Not everyone was ready to absolve. Not everyone had forgotten the ambulance. There were still those who sent glances that lingered, who clutched their purses a little tighter when she walked by, who left short, sharp comments on the community message board about old habits and what's next. There was a small group led by a man named Tom Whitaker who had been a longtime resident. He'd been vocal about community standards for years, but his voice had shifted from concern to something colder when Karen's name came up. He had written op-eds in the local online paper questioning whether the neighborhood's reconciliation efforts were a PR makeover for someone who hadn't truly paid her dues. His piece, titled "Trust Isn't Given Back with a Smile," circulated in the private message threads. And while it didn't spark public confrontation, it kept an edge in the background. A reminder that not all healing was linear. Karen saw the article. She felt the weight of Tom's words like a retreaded scar. She could have responded. She could have rallied her small circle of allies to silence him, to call him out, to make sure the narrative didn't shift again. Instead, she did something quieter. She went to his porch. He wasn't home. She left a small card on his door with a message written in careful, simple handwriting. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking for you to watch what I do next. If I fail, call me out. If I don't, you don't have to say it. Just don't stand in the way when someone's life is at stake." She didn't mention the fire. She didn't mention the lawsuit. She didn't mention the training session he had attended begrudgingly last year, and whispered about afterward how there's always something on her agenda. She just left the promise. The next morning, Tom's wife was the one to approach Karen in front of the community center. She didn't speak for long, just nodded and said, "He's reading that card. He didn't show up today, but he's reading it." The small gestures like that were the ones Karen learned to collect. Not the dramatic public declarations, but the quiet shifts, the pauses before sharpness, the lingering of eyes that used to avert. The aftermath of the fire also brought something unexpected, a new idea from the HOA board. During the regular meeting that followed, with the burn aftermath still evident in the neighborhood's conversations, a suggestion came up to create a neighborhood resilience council, a hybrid volunteer response team made up of residents trained in first aid, emergency coordination, and community communication. The concept was to pair people who had institutional knowledge like the old-timers with newer, active participants who had energy and organization like the teenagers from the drills, and to ensure that the neighborhood didn't just react to crises but anticipated them. There was, of course, debate, old divides poked through. Who would lead? Who would be included? Whose voice mattered more? Karen's name came up without her putting it there. Some said, tentatively, "She's done the training. She's been active." Others, with reservation, added, "But remember," the phrase hung unfinished. Mark's father, who had become more of a quiet presence at these meetings, spoke up. "She's seen both sides. She's changed, yes. But she hasn't forgotten. That's the kind of person we need at the table." His voice carried. It wasn't a defense or a plea. It was observation. And the council formed, with Karen given a role not as chair, but as liaison between the active volunteers and the broader community. It was careful inclusion, not full acceptance, but it was movement. And the next test, bigger than policy, was on the horizon, because the moment of real transformation doesn't come from one fire, one apology, or one council seat. It comes from being trusted when the danger isn't loud, when the stakes are hidden, when old impulses could easily pull you back into the dark comfort of the person you used to be. 2 days after the council was formed, a neighbor's child went missing. The boy had ridden his bike toward the creek path that ran behind the cul-de-sac, a trail kids knew as the shortcut. He hadn't come back when he was supposed to. At dusk, when parents started calling, The panic started to spread. Search parties formed, cars lined the street. Flashlights flickered like wary eyes. The usual temptation would have been to panic, to delegate, to let the outrage of how could this happen on our watch drown the clarity of what are we going to do now. Karen didn't wait for instructions. She pulled on her own training vest, grabbed the little radio she'd helped distribute to the council, and joined the group moving toward the brushes. The creek path was a place that had always been a borderline between safe and slightly dangerous. The council's earlier drills had covered how to coordinate in such terrain, designated sweep teams, communication protocols, and a central command point. That night, they went into the dark with that structure in place. It was difficult, dense. Thorns clawed at pant legs, the noises of the night frogs rushing water blurred with anxiety. The boy's mother wandered near the command point, hands over her mouth, eyes wide and unfocused. Mark and his father stood beside her, an anchor of presence. Minutes stretched. Karen coordinated the sweep lines, relaying information back to the center, redirecting a team toward a broken path where the boy's shoe prints had been spotted. She didn't fight for control, she clarified roles, amplified voices of younger volunteers who were getting overwhelmed, and trusted the trained couple who had the local knowledge of that trail. Her old reflex to make it about her intervention was gone. Instead, she amplified others, stitched them together, and kept the tension from fragmenting into panic. When the boy was found stuck in a shallow ravine, frightened, scraped knees, a little muddy but otherwise okay, the cry that rippled through the group wasn't relief alone. It was something like validation. Not for Karen, for the community contract that had formed, that they could still show up for one another. Even after fractures, even after shame, even after fear, the boy's mother held him tight. Her eyes went to Karen. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. Later, as the searchers dispersed, Mark walked up to her. "You led that," he said simply. She nodded. "We all did." He looked past her toward his father, toward the boy now safe in his mother's arms, toward the council volunteers checking gear. "Then keep doing it," he said. She didn't know if it was permission, maybe it was acknowledgement. Either way, it felt like fuel. That night, Karen went home and looked at the emergency vehicle priority sign that had been the symbol of her worst day. The edges were worn now, not because time had broken it, but because hands had touched it so often. People trained there, kids leaned against it while waiting for the bus. It had become, oddly, a place where neighbors quietly left little reminders. A miniature first aid kit tucked behind it. A laminated check-in card taped to its post during storm season. A small cluster of wildflowers stuck at its base. She ran her hand over the letters again. "Thank you," she whispered, not just for the sign itself, but for the chain of events it had started. For the fire, for the council, for the boy. For the chance to be part of something that wasn't earned by demeaning others, but by showing up when it mattered most. The story wasn't finished, but the questions that had hung like threat clouds earlier, the ones about whether you could truly change, whether trust could be rebuilt, whether the shards of a community could be smoothed into something whole again, were beginning to answer themselves in small, stubborn ways. And the most dangerous part of that transformation, she wasn't doing it to impress anyone anymore. She was doing it because she had come to believe deeply that it was the right thing to do. The last thing she expected was a thank you card. It was left in her mailbox, no return address. But the handwriting was unmistakably childlike, looping uneven letters on a folded note card with a faded drawing of a firefighter's helmet on the front. Inside were 5 simple words: "Thanks for finding my brother." Karen stared at the message for a long time, her fingers brushing the edges like they might dissolve under her touch. She didn't cry, not anymore, but something inside her tightened, a deeper kind of ache, the kind that doesn't scream, it hums, quiet and persistent. She placed the card next to the old HOA handbook that still sat on her bookshelf, unopened since the day she'd first turned her neighbors into targets. How strange, she thought. The rules she once lived by had kept her on top, but the choices she now lived by had brought her home. The Neighborhood Resilience Council was no longer a pilot project. It had become the foundation of something real. Their name was painted onto a small placard at the community center. They'd coordinated 3 training sessions to search drills, and had already begun planning emergency kits for every household. Karen had become the bridge. She didn't seek praise, but people asked for her input now, not out of fear, not out of obligation, out of earned trust. Still, she never forgot what it cost. That sign still stood outside her driveway and changed. UNREMOVED. Emergency vehicle priority. Bright, unforgiving, honest. It no longer haunted her. It grounded her, because shame, when acknowledged, has a way of becoming responsibility. One afternoon, she saw Evelyn at the garden again. They worked in silence for a while, pulling weeds between tomatoes and cucumbers. The sun was warm, The breeze mild, a comfortable stillness wrapped around them. Then Evelyn looked up and asked, "Do you ever think about moving away, Karen?" Blinked. "You mean leaving the neighborhood?" "Yeah," Evelyn said. "Start over somewhere else. Somewhere people don't remember." Karen's hands paused in the soil. She looked at the rows of sprouting vegetables, the garden beds that didn't exist a year ago. The wooden sign painted by the neighborhood kids that read "Unity grows here." She exhaled softly. "I used to think about it every day." Evelyn nodded, "But now," Karen shrugged, "I think about staying, on purpose. Not because I want to forget, but because I want to remember, the good and the awful, all of it. If I leave, I take the shame with me, but if I keep showing up, I turn it into something else." Evelyn didn't speak, but her eyes softened. She returned to her weeding without another word, and that was enough. Later that week, Karen received an invitation, a child's birthday party, balloons, and cake and messy decorations. The family of the boy she'd helped find during the Creek Trail search had invited the entire neighborhood. Karen stared at the card for a long time. She'd been invited to events before, but always with a lingering question: do they really want me there, or are they just being polite? But this felt different. There was a small note attached, written by the mother herself. "You may not realize how much you changed things, but when my son talks about that night, he says he wasn't scared because you found him. He says you weren't yelling or crying, you just kept your light on and kept calling his name. That gave him courage. Please come celebrate with us." Karen set the card down. And for the first time, since everything had happened, she didn't feel like an outsider looking in. She felt invited. The party was messy, chaotic, and absolutely wonderful. Kids screamed. Icing was smeared across faces, and folding chairs sank slightly into the grass. Karen stayed near the back at first, unsure how to insert herself into joy she hadn't created, but the birthday boy ran to her the moment he saw her. "Miss Karen," he shouted, wrapping his arms around her. She stiffened, still not used to spontaneous affection, but slowly lowered her arms around him. "Happy birthday," she said softly. He beamed up at her. "I saved you cake." And just like that, the last wall crumbled. Neighbors didn't just glance, now they smiled. They handed her paper plates. They asked her about next month's meeting. One woman, whom Karen had once fined for a mailbox flag being slightly tilted, even tapped her gently on the shoulder and said, "I know we've had history, but I see what you've done, and I respect it." Karen turned, lips parting in surprise. The woman nodded. "Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, but it means we can stop carrying the same story forever." That night, Karen sat on her back porch, watching the stars blink to life above the trees. She sipped tea from the chipped mug she'd once threatened to toss because it didn't match the others. Now, it was her favorite. Because imperfection, she'd learned, wasn't something to erase. It was something to embrace. It meant you'd lived, grown, broken, rebuilt. She closed her eyes and thought about the girl who had once dialed 911 to report an ambulance, the woman who had once believed that order mattered more than empathy. She didn't hate that person, she mourned her, and in that mourning, she built something new. A self not defined by status or fear or HOA bylaws. But by resilience. By humility. By showing up again and again even when no one asked her to, especially when no one did. As summer turned to fall, and orange leaves blanketed the sidewalks she once treated like sacred territory, Karen began preparing something of her own, a letter, not for anyone in particular. Not a complaint. Not a formal proposal, just a letter posted on the bulletin board at the community center. A quiet offering to my neighbors. "I want to thank you for not turning your backs, for holding me accountable, for showing me who I could become when I finally stopped pretending I had it all figured out. I used to think respect came from enforcing rules. Now I know it comes from listening, from staying, from learning. I'm not perfect, I never will be, but I will keep trying. And I hope we'll keep building this place together." Karen. And below the letter, someone later tacked up a sticky note. To words, "Welcome home." No one knew who wrote it, but everyone understood it. Because in a world full of viral shaming and quick outrage, this neighborhood had chosen something harder. Patience. Accountability. Redemption. Not the kind you earn in headlines or applause, but the kind you live quietly. Every day. With humility. With your hands in the dirt. With a light in the dark. And with the courage to be the person you weren't yet. Because in the end, it wasn't a sign, a lawsuit, or a spotlight that changed Karen's life. It was what she did after. And sometimes that's all it takes to turn a legacy of fear into a story of hope. And to prove that even the worst mistake can plant the seed of something good if you're brave enough to stay and keep watering it.